question for you. If you're anything like me, I can kind of remember as a kid growing up thinking thoughts along the line of, when I grow up, I'm never going to be like my mom and dad. I mean, I just don't want to be like that. And now at 44, I find myself sometimes sounding like, acting like, talking like my mom and dad. And what's happened to me? Maybe you're not there. Maybe you're on the different side of the equation. Maybe you've got adult children now. And you stand there watching them from a distance, seeing the mess they're making of their life. And you sit there and go, am I the cause of this? Am I responsible for the train wreck that's happened? Are they sitting in the therapist's office talking about me and my failures and I'm the one who's done this to them? If you've ever had those thoughts, I am so glad you're here this morning, because as Gerald said, we're in this series called Dream House. We kicked it off last week and we talked about the fact that we all impact coming generations. We are impacted by those who came before us, and we will impact those who come after us. So we talked about that last week and the idea of a generational curse. What does that mean? And one of the places that's found is in Exodus. It says this, speaking of God, he says, I am slow to anger and filled with unfailing love and faithfulness. I lavish unfailing love to 1,000 generations. It's all about generations, those who come after us. I forgive iniquity, rebellion, and sin, but I do not excuse the guilty. And this is what trips us up, this next part, where he says, I lay the sins of the parents upon their children and grandchildren. The entire family is affected. Even children in the third and fourth generations. The entire family is affected. We're all affected by the sins of those who come before us. And the closer we are to those people, the more we feel the impact. That's why it's 3 or 4 generations. If your parent sins, it impacts you as a child, impacts your children and your children's children. It impacts us in huge ways, because what we learned last week is this: we are all shaped by our parents. And how we parent, how you're currently parenting your children, whether you're still raising them at home, whether you're relating to them as adult children, whether you're relating to them as grandchildren, or even, if you're so blessed, great-grandchildren. How you parent will shape our children's future. That impact goes on and on and on. But what we learned is that it is possible to have a dream house. But it takes work. And so this is kind of what we rested on last week. A dream house is built by breaking generational patterns of dysfunction and establishing godly patterns for future generations. Breaking generational patterns of dysfunction. A lot of us can look and see generational patterns of dysfunction. I can look in my family. I can look in my wife's family. I can see things that her parents or my parents wrestled with. I could see how it impacted us. But I can also see, by God's grace, how those patterns are changing, because we've learned to break down those generational patterns of dysfunction, and we are beginning to establish godly patterns, which now we pray our children and our grandchildren and our great-grandchildren will carry with them into the future. So this morning we want to begin to look at, how do we break down those dysfunctional patterns? What do we do? What's the process of that? So this morning I want to look at 2 incredibly powerful things that we need to do in order to begin to break down those dysfunctional generational patterns. And these things are not easy. They may sound kind of obvious. It's not in the obviousness of them that's the issue. It's in the walking it out. It's in the walking it out of the pain of what was done to you, the pain of what you experienced, the pain of the impact of someone's sin in your life. And how do you begin to walk out these things so that you can stop, you can break away, you can eliminate, or begin to eliminate those those dysfunctional patterns? So here's the first one. The first step to breaking dysfunctional patterns is love. The first step is love. We read this verse last week. This was the verse we ended with. It's in 1 Peter, and it says this: most important of all, continue to show deep love for each other, for love covers a multitude of sins. For some of you, the idea of loving the person who did that to you makes you want to shut down. The idea of loving someone who hurt you that deeply. It may have been some form of abuse. It may have been abandonment. It may have simply been unreasonable expectations. They may have demanded some level of performance from you. It may be that they tried to force you into a mold that's not who you are, not who you were, not who you'll ever be, and all you feel like is your disappointment in their eyes. All you feel like is you're a walking reminder of the disappointment they must see every time they look at you. And you say, forgive, love, I can't do that. Love this person? I don't want to love that person. But here's the thing that I've learned, that when we come to the point of loving, when we say, okay, God, I need to love this person, what it allows us to do is it allows us to begin to break the pattern that has been established. It begins to change something. When it says love covers a multitude of sin, it doesn't mean it looks past it. It doesn't mean it just kind of ignores it. What it means is that when we love, it covers, it begins to remove the continuing impact that sin has. The sins you've committed, the sins that have been committed against you, those sins, we can begin to stop that ongoing, continual impact that it has. Showing love begins to remove the continuing impact of sin. Showing love, that is the key. It's not the emotion of love. It's not feeling an emotional love, but I will say this. The reason it's so hard for you to think about loving somebody, it's because deep down inside, in the places you don't want to admit, you already do. The reason it hurts so much is because you actually love them at an emotional level. You may have shut yourself off, walled yourself off, convinced yourself you don't. But if you spend any level of emotional, mental time thinking about someone, something, it's because you have a deep love for them. But it's not about the emotion of love. I'll say, if you want to say, I don't feel anything for them, fine. You don't have to feel anything for them. It's not about the emotion of love. It's about showing love. It's about putting love into action, as we've talked about in the past, making love a verb. So how do you show love to somebody? How do you show love to somebody that you say they don't deserve love? You do simple little things. Here's one. Pray for them. Pray for them every day with a sincere heart. Here's another one. Do practical things to meet their practical needs. Just little acts of kindness, of love. Here's another one. Call them. If you don't want to talk to them, write them a letter. Visit them. Here's another one. Send them a gift. Send them a gift. And I know what you're thinking. This person doesn't deserve any of those things. They don't deserve, Pastor, you just don't know what they've done to me. They don't deserve it. You're right. They don't. But here's the thing. Did we deserve Jesus? Did we deserve the gift of God coming in the flesh and dying for us? It's not about what they deserve. It's about showing love. So much so that Jesus himself turns this whole idea topside down about showing love to those who don't deserve it, not those who do deserve it. So here's Jesus' words found for us in Luke chapter 6. If you love those who love you, if you love those who deserve it, what credit is that to you? If you do good to those who do good to you, if you do good to those who deserve it, if you show kindness to those who deserve it, if you send letters and gifts and do things for people that deserve it, what credit is that to you? And then Jesus says this: love your enemies. Do good to them. Then your reward will be great. You will be children of the Most High God, because He is kind to the ungrateful. He is kind to the wicked. Those people who have done those horrible, vile things to you, that have acted wickedly towards you, you still need to somehow show love. That is the first step to begin to break down these patterns of dysfunction, it's by showing love. It could be to your parents. It could be to a spouse. It could be to your children. It could be to your grandparents. I don't know where that has to happen in your life. But if you want to have a dream house, if you want to begin to tear down those dysfunctional patterns, you have to show love. And you say, but you don't know what that person did. I don't need to know. I know this. We have violated the holiness of God in ways that we can't even imagine. We have made a mockery of the fact that we're made in His image. And yet He forgives and loves us. So the first step is love. The second step is this. The second step to breaking dysfunctional patterns is forgiveness. If love doesn't make you shut down emotionally, if the idea of loving them doesn't make you want to say, not going to happen, then the idea of forgiveness just might. Because we often think of forgiveness as glossing over, excusing, somehow just giving them a free pass. But that's not what forgiveness is at all. Forgiveness is something that flows naturally out of love. We can't forgive if we don't love. But if we love, we will naturally be motivated to forgive. It's the way God is. One of the most well-known verses in the Bible, John 3:16. For God so loved the world that He sent His Son to forgive them, to die for their sins, to redeem them, so that no one would perish. Forgiveness flows out of love. We have to love first, but if we truly learn to show them love, forgiveness, it may not happen immediately, but forgiveness will begin to be the natural byproduct. But depending on what's happened to you, depending on what's been done to you, depending on the relationship that's been damaged, severed, somehow or other messed up, the idea of forgiveness may just be something that you say, I don't need to forgive. Yeah, they hurt me, they wounded me, but it's not a big deal. I've moved on, they've moved on. I don't need to forgive. I just need to go on with life. There's a young man named William. He was raised by an angry mother, full of visceral hate. She blamed him for everything, and she took it out on him in countless ways. Angry, harsh, brutal, verbally, emotionally, physically. He grew up, moved away, had a conversation with someone, and they said, have you ever thought about forgiving her? And here's what he said. These are his words. I've never thought of forgiving her. It just doesn't matter to me. My father says she changed right after I was born. No one knows why, and I don't care why. And he goes on to say this. I am married, I live in a different city, and I hardly ever see her. I do not expect anything from her, so I don't need to forgive her. I just want to live my life and forget the past. Is that you? I just want to live my life. It happened. It's fine. I forgive them, but I just want to move on and forget about it and, let bygones be bygones. We don't really want to forgive them. We just want to forget about it. Maybe that's you, but maybe what's happened to you is deeper. Maybe the level of needing to forgive goes far beyond that. And maybe your willingness to forgive or not forgive is grounded a lot deeper. To the extent that it's not that you say, I just want to live my life and forget the past. You say, I don't want to forgive them. They deserve to hurt. They deserve to know that what they've done has affected me, and therefore I will never, ever forgive them because they don't deserve forgiveness. Maybe you feel like that. This person, you don't understand, they don't deserve forgiveness. Back in early January of 2017, a man died. His daughter wrote his obituary, and it reflects this idea of forgiveness. I want to read to you her words. Leslie Ray Charping was born in Galveston on November 20th, 1942. Passed away on January 30th, 2017, which was 29 years longer than expected and much longer than he deserved. Leslie battled with cancer in his late years and lost his battle, ultimately due to being the horse's backside, that's not what she wrote, that he was known for. He leaves behind 2 relieved children, a son and a daughter, along with 6 grandchildren and countless other victims, including an ex-wife, relatives, friends, neighbors, doctors, nurses, and random strangers. At a young age, Leslie quickly became a model example of bad parenting combined with mental illness and a complete commitment to drinking, drugs, womanizing, and being generally offensive. Leslie enlisted to serve in the Navy, not so much in a brave and patriotic way, but as part of a plea deal to escape sentencing on criminal charges. While enlisted, he was a naval boxing champion and went on to sufficiently embarrass his family and country by spending the remainder of his service in the Balboa Mental Health Hospital, receiving much-needed mental health service. Leslie was surprisingly intelligent. However, he lacked ambition and motivation to do anything more than being reckless, wasteful, and squandering the family savings while fantasizing about get-rich-quick schemes. His hobbies included being abusive to his family and expediting trips to heaven for the beloved family pets. His life served no other obvious purpose. He did not contribute to society or serve his community, and he possessed no redeeming qualities besides being quick-witted, which was actually amusing during his sober days. While Leslie's passing will be missed only for what he never was: a loving husband, a caring father, and a friend. No services will be held. There will be no prayers for eternal peace and no apologies for those he tortured. Leslie's remains will be cremated and kept in the barn to be used when the donkey's wood shavings run out. Leslie's passing proves that evil does in fact die, and hopefully marks a time of healing and safety for all. When I read that, I thought it was a joke. It wasn't a joke. Those are the words of a daughter to her father. He doesn't deserve forgiveness. He doesn't deserve peace, and I will not give it to him. Maybe you've come to that point where you think the idea of forgiving, the idea of somehow giving them an opportunity to find peace is not your responsibility. You think they did this, they deserve to suffer for what they've done. But we are called to love and to forgive. To love and to forgive. It's so important that we do that. Now, I want to say, in forgiving, when you learn to forgive somebody, it doesn't mean that you won't still feel angry. And it's okay. It is okay to feel angry. The Bible says, be angry, but do not sin. Don't let the sun go down on your anger. In other words, when you have those feelings of anger, that's okay. Don't let it become sinful. Don't let it just marinate in your heart. Deal with it. But it's okay to feel angry for what happened to you. It's okay to hurt for what happened to you. The Psalms tell us that God is close to the brokenhearted. It's okay to hurt for what's happened to you. What's not okay is allow those things to go undealt with, because when you do, over time, it will become bitterness, resentfulness. It will become something that takes root in your heart, and it will keep every relationship that you have from becoming all that it could be. And it will be passed down to those that come after you. If you won't forgive those that did this stuff to you, your spouse, your parents, your children, your grandchildren are watching. But if they see someone who's willing to forgive, who's willing to deal with those things, it makes a huge difference. As a matter of fact, the writer of the book of Hebrews puts it like this: see to it that no one misses the grace of God, and that no bitter root grows up to cause trouble and defile many. When you allow that bitterness to take root in your heart, it doesn't just impact you, it defiles many. And those many are most often those that are closest to you. Family members, children, parents. So don't allow the root of bitterness into your heart. So if we're going to break generational patterns, here's what we need to do. Remember, breaking generational patterns of dysfunction depends on love and forgiveness. Love and forgiveness. Love them, and out of love flows forgiveness. So how do we do that? How do we love and forgive people who have hurt us deeply, that we are so disappointed in, that we just say, my life would be so much better if, my life would be so much different if they hadn't, if they had, if they didn't, if they did. How do we do that? Here's two important things. The first is this: see them as God sees them. See them as God sees them. This is incredibly difficult. It's so hard. But if you refuse to see them as God sees them, all you'll see is through eyes of anger and resentfulness, bitterness. When you begin to see them as God sees them, you realize they were a child once. They had hopes and dreams. They had things that they wanted to do and accomplish, and their life may have gone off the rails, and they were raised by parents who were, or they were abandoned by such and such. They were left into orphanages. They were made to scrape by, and their whole life was a train wreck. You see them as God sees them. You see a person with potential. God looks at you and me, and he says, I have a plan and a purpose for you. I have dreams for you. God has dreams for all of us. When God looks at us, he doesn't see the mess we've made of our lives. He looks at us who are made in his image and say, you have all the potential in the world. We need to see people like that, but please hear me. This is not making an excuse. It's finding grace. It's not making an excuse for what they've done. What they've done is horrible. It's no excuse, but if you want to truly love and forgive, you have to find grace. And the place to start finding grace is to see with the eyes of Jesus. It's to see how God sees. Because if you won't do that without seeing them as a person, they become nothing more than the wrong they did. If you won't see them as a person, all they are is the evil that they've done, the vile thing that they did. All you see them for is what they did to you, not the frail, hurting, confused mixture of right and wrong, good and bad, hurting humanity that we all are. All we see is them as totally, completely bad. But they're not. They're a person. They're a person. And we need to see with those eyes. And that is incredibly difficult. The deeper the hurt, the harder it is. But if you do that, you'll find grace. And you can begin to love. You can begin to forgive. The second thing in order to be able to love and forgive is this: see the possibility of restored relationship. See the possibility of restored relationship. Listen, God is a God who desires restoration. I'm here to tell you, not every relationship will be restored. Not every relationship ought to be restored. But there is a possibility for every relationship to be restored. So here's what typically happens when it comes to the idea of loving and forgiving. We may realize, okay, I'm called to forgive. I'll forgive. I'll do it. Don't want to, but I will. God says I have to, so I guess I should. I'll forgive, but they'll never again have access to my life. They'll never hurt me. They'll never influence my life and my family again. So what we typically want to do is this: we want to forgive and reject. We want to forgive and reject. Fine, I forgive you, but I'll never talk to you again. I see this all the time, and it breaks my heart as a pastor. I see parents who won't talk to who won't allow their children to talk to their grandparents because of something the grandparents and the parents have the issue with, and now they're cutting off the access of the grandchildren to the parents. And it's just, okay, I forgive you, but I'm going to reject you out of my life. And we fail to see the impact that's going to have on the coming generations. But what we're called to do is this: we are called to forgive and restore. We're called to forgive and restore relationship when it's possible, when it's doable. If it's at all possible, we're called to restore. I love how Jesus puts it. He says, if you see your friend going the wrong direction, correct him. If he responds, forgive him. Even if it is personal against you, forgive. Even when it personally hurts. And it goes on and says, no matter how many times in one day he sins against you, if he says, I'm sorry, I won't do it again, forgive me, you need to forgive him each and every time. Every time. Each and every time, forgive, forgive, forgive. Now please hear me. This is not easy. This is hard. It's easier to just reject somebody. Fine, I forgive you. Now stay out of my life. But God doesn't do that, does he? He forgives us and says, now I'm swinging the door of heaven wide open. I'm swinging the door of my throne room wide open. Come in, come in, come in your time of need. Come all the way in. Be with me. We're called to reflect the love of God. Now, please hear me. There are exceptions to this. Earlier in January, I did a series called Burned. I did one message just on how to overcome the pain of abuse. So I'm not going to get into all that. You can go back and listen to it online. Hopefully it'll be helpful to you. But if you've experienced abuse and there's ongoing patterns of abuse, emotionally, verbally, physically, sexually, you're not called to restore that relationship. If there's recklessness, if there's patterns of drug abuse or alcohol abuse and it's ongoing and there's no change, you don't need to invite that person back in. But here's the deal. You are called to see the possibility. Are you called to see the possibility? Yes. Are you called to pursue the opportunity? No. Possibility? Yes. Opportunity? No. Here's how Paul puts it, writing in 2 Timothy. There will be people who are unloving and unforgiving. They will slander others and have no self-control. They will be cruel and have no interest in what is good. They will be reckless. Here's what he tells them. He says, you must stay away from people like that. Now, please hear me. That is not the cosmic loophole. Oh, I'm off the hook. Don't have to restore the relationship. There are times when you can't. And when that happens, feel free. Because in those situations, you are not withholding restoration. They are not allowing it. They are not allowing it. You may desire it as long as you see the possibility and say, if they would, I could. That's all God asks. But if they do, then you must. If they change, if there's a shift in their life, if something begins to turn, then you have to pursue that. And see, I have to move from just the possibility to look for the opportunity. But this is not easy. Walking out the process of loving and forgiving is a difficult journey, and it is a journey. You'll start down that path, and out of the blue, you'll find yourself getting angry for seemingly no reason. You'll find yourself slipping into a depression. You'll see something that seems so insignificant, and it brings a flood of emotions back to you. A parent and a child in the park, and one little sentence that you overhear, and it brings everything back to you. You see a Christmas movie on the Hallmark Channel. God forbid. But it just wrecks you, not in a Hallmarky way, but in a way that you say, where is this coming from? Because it's a process. You have to walk through it. But here's my promise to you. A dream house is not built overnight, but it can happen. You can begin to tear down those dysfunctional patterns. Remember, Jesus is talking, and someone says to him, how many times should I forgive my brother? Peter asks him. Peter says, how many times should I forgive my brother? 7 times? And Jesus says, 7 times. How about 7 times 70? Now, Jesus is not saying 490 magic number. What he's saying is this. Peter is actually trying to be very gracious. The kind of standard at that time that most rabbis taught was you only had to forgive somebody 3 times. After 3 times, you no longer needed to forgive them. So Peter says, I'm spiritual. I think 7 is the number of God. It's the number of completion. 7 times, right, Jesus? That's way more gracious than most rabbis. And Jesus blows him away and says, no. Basically, what Jesus is saying is forgiveness has to become an ongoing dynamic of your life. That it doesn't just happen once, it happens over and over and over and repeatedly. Because forgiveness isn't a one-time thing. It is a lifestyle. It is a journey. Here's how C.S. Lewis put it. C.S. Lewis says, the passage about forgiving others 70 times 7 may not be for 490 separate offenses, but perhaps 490 times for the same one. I've forgiven you. I've forgiven you. And I keep forgiving you for 490 times until forgiveness is finally and completely and totally real in my life. Because I've learned to love you, now I can actually forgive you. And then C.S. Lewis went on to say this: it has taken me 30 years to fully forgive the person who abused me as a child. That is a lifestyle of forgiveness. We need to remember forgiveness is not an act of emotion, but an act of the will. It's not an emotional reality. It is something you choose to do. But when you're confronted with it, it's when it hurts. Thinking about forgiveness during the week is fine. When the pastor preaches on it on a Sunday morning, man, it's right there. What am I going to do with this? What am I going to do with the flood of emotions that I'm feeling right now? Corrie ten Boom grew up in Amsterdam. During World War II, her family hid Jewish refugees in their home. They were eventually discovered. Her family was separated and sent to concentration camps. Corrie and her sister Betsy were sent to Ravensbrück in Germany. While there, Corrie watched hundreds, thousands of people die. Horrible deaths, including her sister Betsy. She was one of the few survivors, and at the end of World War II, as a Christian and a believer in Christ, she went back into Germany and began to preach on grace, forgiveness, found in Jesus and Jesus alone. And one day in Munich, she shared her story, she shared about grace, she shared about forgiveness. And afterward, a middle-aged balding man approached her. But she didn't see him as a middle-aged balding man. She saw him as the man he was, the guard at Ravensbrück, standing there in his blue uniform with his cap, riding crop in his hand, and the skull and crossbone insignia on his coat. She remembered as if it happened yesterday, standing in the room with the blaring bright lights and the pile of shoes and dresses in the center of the room as she was made to walk naked in front of the guard. This man was a guard there, one of the cruelest guards. She remembered it as if it was yesterday. She remembered him. He didn't remember her. He walks up to her and says, "It was such a wonderful message to be reminded about the grace and the forgiveness and the love of God. Thank you." And he extends his hand. She looks, doesn't take his hand in return. He says, "You mentioned Ravensbrück." He puts his hand down. He says, "You mentioned Ravensbrück in your talk. I was a guard there. But since the war, I've become a Christian. I know that God has forgiven me for the cruelty that I administered while I was there. But I want to know, can you forgive me? Fraulein, will you forgive me?" And he extends his hand again. And at that moment, Corrie stood there. Her blood froze in her veins as she looks at this man. And she thinks to herself, does he think he can just ask me to forgive and it erases everything? The pain that I've endured all these years, the suffering that I saw my sister walk through and all those people, does he think he can just extend his hand and I'll forgive him? I can't do it. I won't do it. And she stood there, paralyzed, just moments ago preaching about God's love and forgiveness. And as she stood there, it dawned on her, these thoughts. God, I can't forgive him, but I didn't die for him. Jesus did. And so she just prayed a simple little prayer. God, help your forgiveness flow through me. With everything she could, she extended her hand. It was mechanical. It was wooden. There was no emotion in it. She intended to say nothing. She just wanted God's forgiveness to be demonstrated. So she reaches out and she writes, when our hands clasp, it was as if an electrical current started in my shoulder and shot down my arm into our hands. And it was this flood of emotion that I have never experienced before. And she says, I cried out in that moment, I forgive you fully and completely. And for what seemed like an eternity, it was probably only a few minutes. They stood there. Former prisoner, former guard, holding hands, tears streaming down their face. And here's what Corrie ten Boom wrote about that encounter. I had never known God's love so intensely as I did at that moment. I knew it was not my ability to forgive. I could not do it. God's love is at the heart of forgiving others. If you want to begin to tear down generational patterns of dysfunction, you have to love and you have to forgive. It starts with love. If you refuse to love them, you can never truly forgive them. If you refuse to love them, you can never truly forgive them. I'm going to ask if you'd stand to your feet.